The rain fell against the glass walls of the penthouse like 1,000 tiny heartbeats, a rhythm of sorrow that echoed the hollowness within. Adrian Thorne stood before the sprawling panorama of the New York City skyline, a king surveying a kingdom. That brought him no joy. The apartment was a monument to his success, a vast, sterile space of gray and chrome where priceless art hung on the walls not for its beauty, but as another asset on a ledger. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the city's glittering lights and the cold, empty perfection of his life. The silence here was a physical weight, a crushing reminder of all he had and all he had lost. He was a titan, a name that commanded respect and instilled fear in equal measure. At 38, he was the architect of a multi-billion-dollar empire, a master of logic and control who could predict the chaotic whims of the market with unnerving precision. He wore his tailored suit like armor, a dark shield against a world. He kept at a distance. His features were sharp, intelligent, but the light in his gray eyes had been extinguished long ago. A ghost lived behind them, the memory of a love and a life that had been stolen from him in a brutal twist of fate, leaving him a man made of nothing but walls. Miles away, in a world Adrian Thorne could not imagine, a different kind of silence reigned. It was the fearful quiet of a pantry that held only ghosts of meals past. Elena Reed cradled her 6-month-old son, Noah, her body a shield against the chill of their small apartment. The room was dimly lit, the worn furniture a testament to a life lived on the edge of financial ruin. Exhaustion was etched into the soft lines of her face, dark circles blooming under her gentle brown eyes. But within those eyes burned a fierce, resilient light, a mother's love that was more powerful than any corporate empire. Noah let out a soft cry, a sound that pierced Elena's heart with a fresh wave of panic. His small body was warm in her arms, a precious weight she would carry through fire. She looked at the canister on the counter, her breath catching in her throat. One last scoop, one final meal before hunger would become a reality she could no longer hold at bay. The medical bill for his fever had taken everything, every last dollar she had saved from endless double shifts at the diner. Her dignity was a flickering candle flame, fighting against the winds of desperation that howled around her. Her phone felt cold and heavy in her trembling hand, a lifeline she was terrified to use. Asking for help was a surrender she had never wanted to make, a confession of her failure to provide for her child. Tears blurred the screen as she composed a message. To her older sister, Chloe, each word a shard of her pride. She wrote of her shame, her fear, her apology for being a burden. The words were a prayer whispered into the digital void, a plea for a small mercy in a world that had shown her so few. She was at her breaking point, a cliff's edge of despair. In her haste, her fingers shaking with a mixture of shame and love. For her son, she made a simple, catastrophic mistake, a single digit, mistyped. A tiny error that would send her desperate plea hurtling across the city, not to her struggling sister, but into the silent, sterile world of a man who had forgotten what it meant to need anything. The message, an arrow shot into the darkness, found a target she could never have conceived of. It flew through the digital ether, a fragile whisper of human suffering on its way to a fortress of solitude. Back in the penthouse, Adrian Thorne stared blankly at the glowing stock tickers on his monitor. Numbers flowed in a relentless, meaningless stream, digits representing fortunes won and lost, yet none of it touched him. His private phone, a device reserved for a handful of contacts, buzzed on the cold marble desk beside him. He glanced at it, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. It was an intrusion, an unwelcome sound in his perfectly controlled world. He expected a sterile business update, another problem to be solved with cold, hard cash and ruthless efficiency. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, ready to dismiss whatever triviality awaited him. And then he read the words. "Chloe, I am so sorry to ask. I know you're struggling too, but Noah is out of formula and I don't get paid for 3 more days. Could you possibly spare $20? I'm at my breaking point." The message was a lightning bolt that struck the very foundation of his fortress. It was so raw, so achingly human. It felt like a foreign language he had once spoken fluently, but had long since forgotten. The name, Noah, echoed in the desolate chambers of his heart, awakening the ghost he had spent 15 years trying to bury. $20. The request was so humble, so devastating in its smallness, that it shattered the apathy he had cultivated so carefully. For the first time in over a decade, a genuine emotion pierced through his armor. Not anger, not annoyance, but a profound, disorienting shock. It was a crack in the ice, a single desperate message that threatened to break him wide open and expose the wounded man hiding inside the billionaire. What was this? A scam? A pathetic attempt to prey on a stranger's sympathy? His mind, trained to see deception and calculate risk, immediately tried to dismiss it, to categorize it as just. Another piece of digital noise in a world full of it. But he couldn't. The raw vulnerability of the text held him captive, the quiet dignity in the apology, the sheer terror simmering beneath the simple request. He stared at the screen, the glittering city forgotten, the stock tickers fading into the background. A life was being lived on the other end of this message, a life of struggle he hadn't considered in years. Adrian's first instinct was to delete the message, to erase the raw plea as if it were a glitch in the matrix of his life. His world operated on calculated decisions, on assets and liabilities, not on the desperate cries of strangers. For a moment, the cold logic that had built his empire took over, whispering of scams and an emotional entanglement he could not afford. He had spent 15 years building a fortress around his heart, and this single text message was a Trojan horse. Left at the gates. To respond was to acknowledge a vulnerability he had sworn to bury forever, to admit that a part of him was still human. But the name echoed. Noah. It was a phantom limb, an ache for a future that had died on a rain-slicked road a lifetime ago. He saw for a fleeting, torturous moment the face of the son he never held, the child whose future he had planned with a love so fierce it had nearly destroyed him when it was extinguished. The desperation in the text wasn't just about money. It was the sound of a parent's worst fear, a terror he understood on a cellular level. He couldn't delete the message. It was no longer just a text. It was a ghost from his past, demanding to be seen. With a resolve that felt foreign and impulsive, he turned to his laptop. His fingers, which usually orchestrated billion-dollar acquisitions, moved with a different purpose now. He was a man with near-limitless resources, a god of the digital age who could pull information from the ether with a few keystrokes. He initiated a discreet, untraceable background check on the phone number, a violation of privacy he justified with a sudden, overwhelming need to know. He had to understand if this agonizing plea was real, if the world was truly this cruel to a mother and her child. It took less than 5 minutes. The file appeared on his encrypted screen, a stark, black-and-white summary of a life of struggle. Elena Reed. 24 years old, a waitress at a downtown diner, an apartment in a neighborhood he typically only flew over. Her record was spotless, filled with nothing but hard work and the quiet dignity of survival. He saw the public records of her ex-partner's abandonment, a legal footnote that screamed of a profound betrayal. The file painted a picture of a woman utterly alone, fighting a battle against impossible odds, and the brutal reality of her situation settled in his chest, like a stone. The ghost of the father he never became stirred within him, a dormant giant awakened from a long slumber. He saw her exhaustion, her fear, and in her, he saw the strength of the woman he had loved. This wasn't about charity, not really. It was about rectifying a cosmic injustice, about silencing a painful echo in his own soul. It was a chance to do for this stranger, this Elena, what he could no longer do for the woman who haunted his every waking moment. A decision, swift and unshakable, formed in his mind, a choice that defied every rule he had lived by for 15 years. He wouldn't just send money. That was too easy, too impersonal. It was a transaction, and this felt like something more. He picked up his phone, but instead of texting back, he dialed the private number of the manager of a 24-hour high-end grocery store in her neighborhood, a man who knew to ask no questions when Adrian Thorne called. His voice was calm, authoritative, the CEO taking command, but the words he spoke were infused with a strange, protective warmth that was entirely new. He wasn't closing a deal, he was orchestrating a rescue. He began to list his demands, each item a brick in a new wall of security. He was building around a woman he had never met. 6 months' worth of the highest quality baby formula, diapers in escalating sizes, groceries to fill her empty pantry, fresh fruits, vegetables, wholesome foods, enough to last for weeks. And finally, a prepaid debit card loaded with $5,000, a sum that was pocket change to him but would be a lifeline to her. He instructed the manager to arrange for an immediate, silent delivery to be left at her doorstep. As a final thought, he dictated the contents of a simple, anonymous note. Every child deserves to be safe and fed. Please, accept this help. The words were carefully chosen, meant to soothe her pride and erase any sense of obligation. He was a ghost, a benefactor in the shadows, terrified of what would happen if he stepped into the light. He wanted to provide the safety he had failed to give his own family, but from a distance, where he could not be hurt again, where he would not have to feel the warmth of the fire he was building. An hour later, Elena was rocking Noah back to sleep, humming a soft lullaby on a breath of despair, when a gentle knock sounded at her door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was too late for visitors, too late for anyone good to be calling. Fearfully, she peered through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Cautiously, she opened the door a crack. Her eyes fell to the floor, and for a moment, she thought she was dreaming, that the stress had finally caused her mind to break. The hallway was filled with boxes and grocery bags, a mountain of provisions stacked neatly before her door. She stepped out, her bare feet cold on the worn linoleum, and stared in disbelief. There were boxes of diapers, cartons of formula, bags overflowing with food she hadn't been able to afford in months. Her shaking hands found the small envelope resting on top of one of the boxes. Inside, a simple white card held a debit card and a few lines of typed text. Her eyes scanned the words. Every child deserves to be safe and fed. Tears, hot and overwhelming, streamed down her face. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shattering relief that felt like grace. Elena moved like a woman in a dream, carrying the unexpected bounty from the cold hallway into the warmth of her small home. The scent of fresh bread and ripe fruit filled the air, chasing away the stale smell of poverty and fear. She stocked the pantry, her hands caressing boxes of pasta and cans of soup, her eyes welling with fresh tears at the sight of a cupboard no longer bare. Each item was a promise, a tangible piece of security that she hadn't dared to hope for. It was an impossible, overwhelming act of kindness from a phantom, a guardian angel she couldn't thank, and the sheer scale of the gift was dizzying. With a sense of reverence, she opened a canister of the new formula. The soft hiss as she broke the seal was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She prepared a bottle for Noah, her movements no longer frantic with panic, but steady and calm. As her son drank, his small body relaxing in contentment, the tight knot of terror that had lived in Elena's chest for weeks finally began to unwind. She looked down at his peaceful face, the vulnerability and absolute trust in his eyes, and felt a wave of gratitude so immense it almost brought her to her knees. Someone, somewhere, had heard her silent scream. But as the initial shock subsided, a new feeling began to creep in alongside the relief. A quiet, unnerving wariness. Who would do something like this? The generosity was astounding, but the anonymity was unsettling. This unseen benefactor knew her address, knew her desperation. She felt a profound sense of exposure, as if a stranger had looked directly into the most secret, shameful corner of her life. While she was grateful for the help, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being a piece in a game whose rules she did not understand. It was a miracle, but it was a frightening one. She held the simple white card in her hand, reading the typed words over and over. Every child deserves to be safe and fed. The sentiment was pure, noble, and yet it offered no clues. There was no name, no contact, nothing but the gesture itself. It was both a comfort and a mystery, an act of supreme empathy from a complete unknown. Elena made a silent vow that this generosity would not be wasted. She would use this breathing room not as a crutch, but as a foothold to climb out of the hole she was in. She would honor this gift by building a better life for her son. Meanwhile, back in his sterile penthouse, Adrian Thorne found no peace. He had solved the immediate problem, extinguished the fire of Elena's desperation with a fraction of his wealth, but instead of relief, he felt a strange and growing restlessness. The silence of his apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the imagined sounds of a baby's cry and a mother's soft hum. He had opened a door he was not sure he could close, and the light pouring through was both blinding and alluring. He had meant to be a ghost, but he found himself haunted instead. He developed a new, secret obsession. Using the vast surveillance and data analysis tools at his company's disposal, he began to check on them, always from a safe digital distance. He would watch grainy security footage from a camera across the street from her apartment building just to see her leave with Noah in a stroller. He tracked her debit card purchases, feeling a bizarre sense of satisfaction when she bought diapers or baby clothes. He told himself it was due diligence, a way of ensuring his investment in her well-being was sound. But it was a lie. He was watching over them. A warmth he had long considered dead began to thaw the permafrost around his heart. A protective instinct, fierce and primal, took root in his soul. When he saw her smiling as she pushed Noah on a park swing, he felt an unfamiliar echo of joy. These feelings terrified him more than any market crash or hostile takeover. They were the feelings he'd had before, the feelings that had preceded the greatest pain of his life. To feel this way was to stand on the edge of a cliff from which he had already fallen once before. He remembered the wreckage, the scent of rain on asphalt, the unbearable silence where there should have been a cry. That memory was his jailer, the reason for the fortress he had built. He believed with every fiber of his being that love was a prelude to devastation. Getting any closer to Elena and Noah, allowing this fragile connection to grow, felt like willingly walking into the same fire that had burned his entire world to the ground. He was a master of mitigating risk, and this feeling was the greatest risk of all. He tried to force himself to stop. He had intervened. The woman and her child were safe. His duty, a duty he had assigned to himself, was done. He could walk away now, delete the file on Elena Reed, and return to his life of detached, predictable solitude. He could go back to being the king in his glass castle, untouched and untouchable. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. It was the only way to protect himself from the inevitable pain that followed any genuine human connection. The only way to keep the ghosts of his past from rising again. But he couldn't. Each day, he found himself drawn back to the screen, to the silent, distant observation of their lives. The wrong number text had not been a simple mistake. It had been a key, unlocking a part of himself he thought had died 15 years ago. He was no longer just an observer. He was emotionally invested, a silent guardian tethered to them by a thread of his own making. He was terrified of pulling it, of drawing them closer, but he was even more terrified of letting it go and returning to the crushing absolute silence of being alone. Several weeks passed, and a fragile sense of peace settled over Elena's life. The constant gnawing anxiety about food and shelter had receded, replaced by a quiet hope. With the pressure lifted, she was able to be more present for Noah. Her smiles genuine, her laughter no longer a rarity. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade, and she moved with a lighter step, the weight of the world no longer resting solely on her shoulders. She had even started an online course in bookkeeping, using the precious free time afforded to her by the anonymous gift to build a better future, one small step at a time. This newfound stability, however, did not go unnoticed. Like a predator, drawn to the scent of life, Noah's father, Shane, reappeared. He was a man who drifted through life on a current of charm and manipulation, leaving a wake of broken promises. He saw Elena on the street one afternoon, looking healthier and less haunted, with Noah dressed in new, clean clothes. His mind, always calculating personal advantage, immediately saw an opportunity. He didn't see a mother who was finally thriving. He saw a resource he had failed to fully exploit. He approached her with a practiced, easy grin that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Well, well, look at you," he'd said, his gaze flicking over her and the baby supplies in her shopping bag. "Looks like you landed on your feet. Find yourself a rich boyfriend to take care of you?" The question wasn't curious. It was an accusation, laced with a possessive jealousy that made Elena's skin crawl. She instinctively pulled Noah closer, her body forming a protective barrier. The fragile piece she had so carefully nurtured felt as if it were about to shatter. "What I do is none of your business, Shane," she replied, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. The desperation that had once made her weak in his presence was gone, replaced by the quiet strength of a woman who was no longer drowning. "If you're here for money, I don't have any for you." She tried to move past him to escape the toxic pull of his presence, but he sidestepped, blocking her path. His charming facade dissolved, revealing the manipulative cruelty that lay just beneath the surface. His eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, Elena. Someone is bankrolling you, and I think as Noah's father, I'm entitled to a piece of that. Or maybe," he added, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "I should be more involved in my son's life. A judge might be very interested to hear how his mother is living off handouts from mysterious men. They might think a more stable environment with his father is what's best for him." The threat hung in the air, a declaration of war against everything she held dear. He wasn't threatening her. He was threatening to take her son. From the sterile comfort of his office, Adrian Thorne watched the scene unfold on a discreetly accessed public security feed. He had been reviewing quarterly reports, but his attention had been divided, a part of his mind always tuned to the frequency of Elena and Noah. He saw Shane's approach, saw the swagger in his step, and a cold, primal anger began to build in his chest. He read their body language, the way Elena flinched and then stood her ground, the way Shane cornered her. He couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. He knew a predator when he saw one. The background check he ran on Shane took seconds and confirmed his worst assumptions, a history of petty crime, debt, and broken commitments. This man was a parasite, and he had just attached himself to the two people Adrian had anonymously sworn to protect. The rage that filled him was unfamiliar. It wasn't the cold, calculated anger of a boardroom battle. It was a hot, visceral fury. The distance he had so carefully maintained no longer felt safe. It felt like a failure, like a dereliction of a duty he had never asked for, but now felt with every fiber of his being. He was now faced with a choice that went against every instinct for self-preservation he had honed over the last 15 years. To remain a ghost in the shadows meant leaving Elena to face this manipulative threat alone, to let this man terrorize her and use Noah as a pawn. But to intervene, to step out into the light and confront Shane directly, would be to shatter his anonymity. It would mean tangling his life with hers in a real, undeniable way. It would mean making himself vulnerable again, not just to Elena, but to the world. The gift that was meant to be a shield for her had inadvertently become a beacon for her tormentor. The irony was a bitter pill. He had wanted to give her peace, but he had only succeeded in making her a target. The situation had escalated beyond anonymous deliveries and distant observation. A wolf was at her door, and he was the only one who had the power to drive it away. The walls of his fortress, once impenetrable, now felt like a prison, trapping him while the person he felt compelled to protect was in danger. Elena stood frozen on the sidewalk long after Shane had swaggered away, his threat echoing in her ears. The fear was back, colder and sharper than before. It was no longer about hunger or poverty, but about losing her son. She clutched Noah so tightly he let out a small whimper, her world shrinking to the terrifying possibility of Shane making good on his promise. And in his penthouse, Adrian Thorne stared at the frozen image of her terrified face on his screen, his hand clenched into a fist. The time for watching from the shadows was over. A choice had to be made. If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support is what motivates us to keep bringing you romances that warm the heart. The days that followed Shane's reappearance were shrouded in a fog of fear. Elena's newfound peace evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind the cold dread of being hunted. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart would seize, expecting to see his name. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to take his shape. She started taking different routes to the grocery store, her head on a constant swivel, her body tense with a vigilance that was exhausting her soul. The joy of her recent security was poisoned by the knowledge that it had made her a target, turning her anonymous miracle into a dangerous liability. Shane began a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to wear her down and break her spirit. He would text her at all hours, his messages oscillating between false charm and veiled threats. "Just wanted to see how my boy is doing," one might read, followed hours later by, "A good mother wouldn't keep a son from his father." He started appearing near her apartment building, leaning against a wall, a smug look on his face, never approaching, but making sure she saw him. His presence was a constant, unnerving pressure, a reminder of his power to destroy her world. Despite the terror that coiled in her stomach, Elena refused to break. The love for her son had forged a spine of steel within her. She meticulously saved every threatening text message and logged every unwanted appearance, building a dossier of his harassment. She spent an afternoon at a legal aid clinic, her voice trembling as she explained the situation, only to be met with sympathetic but discouraging words. Without proof of physical harm or a direct threat, a custody battle would be her word against his, a messy, expensive fight she had no resources to win. Her feeling of isolation was absolute. From his digital perch, Adrian witnessed every move in Shane's cruel game. His surveillance was no longer passive. It was a focused, tactical operation. He had algorithms monitoring Shane's social media, flags on his financial transactions, and had even managed to access the voicemails Shane left on Elena's phone. He listened to the slimy, manipulative words, the false sincerity, and the underlying venom, and his rage became a cold, quiet thing. He was no longer just a protector. He was a hunter, patiently gathering the ammunition he would need to annihilate his target. He began compiling his own file, a comprehensive portfolio of Shane's character that would be damning in any court of law. It was a task he was uniquely suited for, using the same ruthless efficiency he applied to dismantling corporate competitors. He unearthed hidden debts, passed restraining orders from other women, a pattern of behavior that painted a picture of a remorseless predator. While he worked, he told himself it was a strategic exercise, a problem to be solved. But it was a lie to protect himself from the truth. He was doing this for her, for them, and the distinction between protector and partner was beginning to blur. He found himself admiring her resilience, her fierce dignity in the face of such ugliness. He saw her leaving the legal aid clinic, her shoulders slumped in defeat, yet when she picked Noah up from the stroller, her face transformed with a love that was radiant and absolute. He saw a hero, not a victim, and that admiration was blossoming into something deeper, something that felt terrifyingly like the love he had sworn off forever. He was starting to care not just about their safety, but about her happiness, a thought that was both profoundly comforting and deeply alarming. The digital distance was no longer enough. The need to see them with his own eyes became a compulsion. He couldn't fight. One afternoon, he had his driver take him to her neighborhood, parking a block away from a small park. He watched from the tinted window of his car as Elena pushed Noah on a swing, her laughter carrying on the breeze, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. It was a simple, perfect moment of domestic peace, and it lanced through him with an equal measure of longing and agony. It was the life he was supposed to have had. This proximity made the ghosts of his past more vivid, more demanding. In Noah's happy shouts, he heard the silence of the son he never knew. In Elena's gentle smile, he saw the face of the woman he had lost. The pain of his past was no longer a distant memory, but a living entity, walking beside the burgeoning hope for a future he didn't believe he deserved. To step into their lives would be to ask these two worlds to coexist, and he feared the collision would destroy them all, just as it had destroyed him before. Elena sat on her sofa late one night, the weight of her solitude pressing down on her. Shane had left another voicemail, this one more menacing than the last. She looked at the prepaid debit card on her coffee table, the symbol of both her salvation and her current nightmare. For a fleeting moment, she considered the unthinkable, giving him what he wanted. Maybe a few $1,000s would make him disappear, at least for a while. The thought of surrendering made her feel sick, but the thought of losing Noah was infinitely worse. Her strength was beginning to fray. Adrian, listening to the duplicated voicemail through a secure connection, heard the shift in Shane's tone and felt a surge of alarm. He had a live feed of Elena's apartment, a measure he had taken after the harassment began, and he saw her staring at the card, saw the look of utter defeat on her face. He realized then that his strategy of waiting and watching was a luxury he could no longer afford. Shane was escalating, and Elena was nearing her breaking point. If he didn't act, and act soon, all the evidence in the world wouldn't matter, because the woman he was trying to protect would already be broken. The sight of Elena's near surrender was the catalyst Adrian needed. Passivity was no longer an option. He had to build a bridge into her world, but he couldn't simply appear and confess his secret. The shock and strangeness of it might drive her away. He needed a pretext, a plausible and structured reason for the CEO of Thorne Industries to cross paths with a waitress from a world away. His mind, accustomed to complex corporate strategy, formulated a plan that was both brilliant in its execution and deeply personal in its intent. He would use the machinery of his empire to orchestrate their meeting. Within 24 hours, the charitable branch of his company, the Thorne Foundation, announced a new flagship initiative, the Fresh Start Grant, a program designed to provide financial and professional support to single parents in underserved New York communities. It was a legitimate, well-funded program, but its creation was a ruse, a sophisticated tool designed for a single purpose: He arranged for the selection process to be randomized in such a way that Elena Reed's name would inevitably be the first one chosen. He would hide his personal crusade in the respectable guise of corporate philanthropy. An official embossed letter arrived at Elena's apartment 2 days later. She opened it with trepidation, expecting another bill or a notice from the city. Instead, she read that she had been selected as an inaugural recipient of the Thorne Foundation's Fresh Start Grant, an award that included financial aid, educational resources, and legal support. The news was so overwhelmingly positive, so impossibly timely, that her first reaction was suspicion. It felt like another trick, another miracle too good to be true. But the letterhead was real, the foundation reputable, and a small, desperate part of her dared to hope again. The meeting was scheduled at the Thorne Industries headquarters, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that seemed to touch the clouds. Elena felt small and out of place as she walked through the cavernous marble lobby, Noah asleep in his stroller. She was escorted to a top-floor conference room with a view that stole her breath away. She expected to meet a foundation administrator, a polite but distant corporate functionary. She did not expect Adrian Thorne himself to walk into the room, his presence immediately filling the space with an aura of quiet, formidable power. For Adrian, this was the most difficult negotiation of his life. He was a master of controlling, his emotions of presenting a placid, unreadable mask to the world, but now his heart was hammering against his ribs. He had to pretend he was meeting a stranger, a mere grant recipient, when in reality he knew the sound of her laughter and the brand of her son's diapers. He extended a hand, his touch brief and professional, but the simple contact sent a jolt through his system. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone, "thank you for coming. I wanted to oversee this initiative personally." Elena was taken aback. She knew Adrian Thorne by his fearsome public reputation, a ruthless shark of the business world. But the man before her was different. He was impeccably dressed and intensely focused, but there was a deep weariness in his gray eyes that she hadn't expected, a flicker of something that looked less like arrogance and more like sorrow. When his gaze fell upon a sleeping Noah, a subtle softening occurred in his expression, a fleeting moment of unguarded humanity that intrigued her and put her slightly at ease. He didn't seem like a shark. He seemed like a man carrying a heavy burden. He spoke about the foundation's goals, his words precise and professional. He skillfully guided the conversation toward the specific challenges faced by parents in her situation, his questions insightful and empathetic. He was creating a space for her to speak, a safe harbor where she might feel comfortable sharing the truth of her struggle. Adrian listened, truly listened, absorbing every word, his face a mask of professional concern that concealed a torrent of protective emotion. He was playing a dangerous game, trying to earn a trust he felt he didn't deserve. Feeling an unexpected sense of security in his calm, powerful presence, Elena found herself opening up. She didn't tell him everything, but she spoke of the difficulties, of being alone, of the constant fear of not having a safety net. Hesitantly, she mentioned that she was dealing with recent complications from her son's father, her words carefully chosen to avoid sounding like a victim. "He's making things difficult," she said simply, the understatement of the year. For Adrian, hearing it from her lips, seeing the flicker of fear in her eyes, made his blood run cold. This was the opening he had been waiting for. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Our goal with this grant is to provide total stability," he said, his voice laced with an authority that was immensely reassuring. "That includes a safe home environment. The foundation retains a top-tier legal team, and their services are at the disposal of all our recipients. If this person is harassing you or threatening you in any way, Ms. Reed, we can make him stop." He framed it as policy, a standard feature of the program, a detached solution to a common problem. Elena stared at him, stunned into silence. For weeks, She had felt utterly powerless, a small boat tossed on a stormy sea. Now, this man, this titan of industry, was offering her the one thing she needed most, a shield. The relief was so profound it felt like she could finally breathe again. She didn't understand why he was being so kind, why he was taking a personal interest, but she was too desperate to question it. With tears she fought to hold back, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I would be very grateful for the help." A few days later, the sun was warm in a clear blue sky, and for the first time in a long time, Elena felt its warmth on her skin. She was at the park with Noah, pushing him gently in a swing, a genuine smile gracing her lips. The meeting with Adrian Thorne had been a turning point, a promise of a real, lasting solution. Her fear of Shane had been replaced by a cautious optimism, a belief that she was no longer alone in her fight. For a few precious hours, she allowed herself to imagine a future free from his shadow, a life of quiet, simple peace for her and her son. But shadows have a way of returning just when you begin to believe in the light. Shane emerged from behind a row of trees, his face twisted in a desperate, ugly sneer. He had likely received a preliminary letter from the Thorne Foundation's legal team, a warning shot that had only served to enrage him and accelerate his plans. He stormed towards them, his movements jerky and aggressive, shattering the park's peaceful atmosphere. Other parents instinctively pulled their own children closer, sensing the dangerous energy radiating from him. The idyllic scene curdled in an instant. "So you think you're clever," he spat, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "You think your new rich boyfriend can just scare me away with some fancy lawyers?" He gestured wildly, his accusations flying, like poison darts. "You're an unfit mother, living off handouts. You think that's better for him than his own father?" He was making a scene, intentionally trying to humiliate her, to paint her as a charity case and a fallen woman in front of the world. Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding, her only instinct to shield Noah from his venom. His words weren't working, and seeing the defiant terror in her eyes, his desperation boiled over into action. "I'm his father! I have rights!" he shouted, and lunged forward, trying to grab Noah from her arms. Elena screamed, a raw, primal sound of a mother protecting her young. She spun away, holding Noah so tightly he began to cry, her body a living shield. "Get away from us, Shane. Don't you dare touch him!" Her voice was no longer trembling. It was roaring, a lioness defending her cub against a scavenger. He wouldn't see the end of his next move. A figure moved with swift, silent purpose, stepping between them. Adrian Thorne, no longer in a suit, but in casual clothes that couldn't conceal the formidable authority in his posture, stood as an immovable wall. He had been watching from a park bench across the lawn, unable to stay away, needing to ensure she was safe. The sight of Shane putting his hands on them had propelled him into motion, shattering the last of his carefully constructed walls. His past, his fear, his rules, they all burned away in that single clarifying moment of protective rage. Shane, momentarily stunned, recovered with a contemptuous sneer. He looked Adrian up and down, taking in the expensive watch and the confident stance, his mind jumping to the most obvious, vulgar conclusion. "And who are you?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "Her rich boyfriend? The one paying for all this?" He gestured around them, at the new stroller, Noah's clean clothes, as if it were all evidence in a trial. He believed this was his trump card, the accusation that would shame them both and prove his point. But Adrian didn't even look at him. His gaze was fixed entirely on Elena, his gray eyes, once so empty, now blazing with an emotion so powerful it made her breath catch. He saw the fear in her face, the fierce love for her son, and he knew this was the moment of truth for them both. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud. but it carried across the sudden silence of the park, thick with the weight of 15 years of unspoken grief and newfound hope. It was a vow, made not in a church, but on this battlefield of a public park. "I am the man who wants to be there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, and every milestone," he said, his words a direct answer to a question Elena hadn't dared to ask. "I am the man who sees not a charity case, but a hero." The confession hung in the air, a stunning, heartfelt declaration that stripped away all pretense. He was laying his broken heart at her feet, offering her the truth of his intentions, the promise of a future he had never thought he would have. He was choosing, finally and irrevocably, to feel again. Then, and only then, did he turn his head, his gaze falling upon Shane with the chilling focus of a predator. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a tone of absolute, unbreakable steel. "You are looking at this child's future," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that promised total annihilation. "And you are not in it." The words were a sentence, a final, irrevocable judgment delivered with the full weight of his power and conviction. In that moment, Shane seemed to shrink, the bully suddenly faced with a force he could not possibly comprehend or fight. Without breaking eye contact with the now pale Shane, Adrian reached out and put a protective arm around Elena's shoulders, pulling her and a crying Noah into his side. It was a simple gesture, but it was a public claiming, a definitive statement. He was no longer a benefactor in the shadows or a man trapped by his past. He was here, in the light, shielding the family he had just chosen. The fortress he had built around his heart had finally crumbled, not to let the pain in, but to let his love out, and in its place, he was building a home. The confrontation in the park was the final decisive battle. In its aftermath, the full force of Adrian Thorne's world descended upon Shane. Armed with months of meticulously gathered evidence, the harassing texts, the threatening voicemails, the documentation of his financial instability and manipulative history, Adrian's legal team dismantled Shane's life with surgical precision. He was served with a permanent restraining order and, faced with overwhelming evidence, willingly relinquished all parental rights in exchange for the lawyers not pursuing criminal charges. He vanished from their lives as quickly as he had appeared, a ghost exorcised by the light. With the threat gone, the space between Adrian and Elena was filled with a tentative, hopeful silence. He helped her and Noah move from the small, memory-filled apartment to a warm, sunlit house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. It was a home, not a showcase, filled with comfortable furniture and space for a little boy to run and play. Here, away from the prying eyes of the world, their relationship began to blossom, built not on a foundation of romance, but on a bedrock of shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and a profound, protective love that had already been tested by fire. There, life together was a tapestry woven from small, quiet moments. It was Adrian, sitting on the floor, patiently helping Noah build a tower of blocks. It was Elena, teaching him how to cook something other than the gourmet meals his private chef prepared. It was the two of them, sitting on the sofa after Noah was asleep, not always talking, but simply sharing the comfortable silence of two people who had found their anchor. He learned the rhythm of her heart, and she discovered the deep well of kindness that lay beneath his guarded exterior. He was not just a protector, he was her partner. True to his word, Adrian empowered her. Seeing her sharp mind and deep empathy, he offered her a position she never could have imagined. Executive director of the Foundation's new Fresh Start grant. It was her program now, a chance to use her own experiences to help others who were struggling as she had. She accepted, not as an act of gratitude, but as a woman stepping into her own power. She was no longer a recipient of charity, but a source of it, working alongside the man she loved to create meaningful change in the world. One evening, as a gentle rain fell outside, echoing the night their worlds first collided, Adrian was in the nursery, rocking a sleepy Noah in his arms. Elena stood in the doorway, watching them, her heart full. He looked up and met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the peace that had eluded him for so long. "I never thought," he began, his voice, a low, soft murmur, "that I would ever get to feel this, to have this." He paused, pressing a gentle kiss to Noah's forehead. "Elena Reed, will you make this official? Will you and Noah be my family forever?" His public transformation was as profound as his private one. He formally launched the Noah Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar charity dedicated to providing emergency aid to single parents, ensuring no one would ever have to feel the helpless desperation Elena had felt that night. The ruthless titan of industry became one of the world's most celebrated philanthropists. He had built an empire to shield himself from pain, and now he was using that same empire as a shield for the most vulnerable, turning the source of his lonely power into a legacy of love. 5 years later, the sun shone brightly on the grand opening of the newest Noah Foundation Community Center. A happy, energetic 5-year-old Noah was chasing a soccer ball across a new lawn, his laughter echoing in the air. Adrian, dressed in jeans and a simple polo shirt, was on his knees, laughing as Noah tried and failed to tie his father's shoelaces for him. The tired, haunted look in Adrian's eyes was a distant memory, replaced by a light of pure, unadulterated joy. He was no longer a king in a glass castle. He was a father playing in a field. Elena, now a respected leader in the world of philanthropy, watched them from the steps of the center, her hand resting on a small baby bump that was just beginning to show. Her eyes were full of a love that was calm, deep, and abiding. A young woman, visibly stressed and clutching the hand of a small toddler, approached her hesitantly, her eyes wide with a familiar mixture of fear and hope. She looked just as lost as Elena had once felt. Elena smiled warmly, a genuine smile that promised safety and understanding. She stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on the young mother's arm, her voice gentle and reassuring. "It's okay," she said, her words bridging the gap between a painful past and a hopeful future. "You're in the right place. We're here to help." The wrong number had not just saved one life. It had started a ripple of kindness, a cycle of grace that would now continue, touching countless others for years to come. The single text message, a desperate plea born of a simple mistake, had rewritten their destinies. It had healed a broken billionaire and empowered a struggling mother, proving that the greatest connections are often forged in the most unexpected ways. It showed that true wealth is not measured by what you have in the bank, but by the love you have in your heart, and that sometimes a wrong number is the first step to finding your right person, your true family, and your fated home. If you liked this video, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you watched until the very end, let us know by commenting with the keyword wrong number so we know you made it. Thank you for being part of our story.